What are the rights of the owner of a business? And particularly, what are the rights of the founders as owners of a startup venture? Well, to begin with, a business venture is controlled primarily by its governance documents. So if you have a partnership and you have a partnership agreement, it's going to be primarily controlled by that. If it's an LLC, it will be a membership or operating agreement. And if it's a corporation, it will be a combination of shareholder agreements, bylaws, and whatever is in the articles of incorporation. But when it comes to the relationship among the owners, that is the first place to look, whatever is in the ownership agreement. Now, there are default rules that cannot be changed in some states that even if you change it in the ownership agreement, it's invalid or ineffective. And those are very numerous in nature and state dependent. But the important thing to understand is that if you don't have one of these agreements in place, then the default rules in the state apply. And there are numerous things that are addressed under state law and routinely addressed within any ownership agreement of a business. First off is right to profit. How do you share the profits and or losses of the business among the owners? The default rule is that there is equal ownership if there is no agreement in place establishing percentage of ownership. Everyone has equal ownership and thus equal access or entitlement to profits and losses of the business. Now, if you have a different ownership percentage or an ownership percentage laid out in the governance documents, then generally the right to profits is attributed to owners based upon their ownership percentage. And particularly for tax purposes, you have to have some justification and good rationale for distributing proceeds from the business differently than in accordance with percentage of ownership. So that's the first issue, is right to profit. Next is the issue of control and decision making. Once again, without a governance document changing this, there is a default rule that all owners of a business have equal ownership and control. Now, if you have established ownership percentages, then the majority owner may have more control than others because, once again, they're represented more in their ability to express the rights associated with each unit or percentage of ownership interest. But the default rule is equal rights of control. Now, you can change this with the governance documents internally and say someone is limited to particular functions or doesn't have any function at all other than serving as an owner of the business. But generally the rule is, to the outside world, there are perceptions as to a person's rights of control and decision making. So if a person has a particular title or they are known as being an owner of the business, there is a presumption that they have. So even if they don't actually have a certain level of control or right to control the decision making of the business or the right to act on behalf of the business, there's a perception towards outsiders that they do. And that can only be overcome through putting the public on notice of a person's limited ownership rights and interests in terms of control and decision making for the business. Okay. Next is voting rights. Well, this is a default rule that oftentimes cannot be changed even by the operating agreement, but the voting rights at a bare minimum allow someone to vote for major decisions and who represents the high-level management of the company, meaning who's on the board of directors of a corporation, for example. So voting rights, that's generally uniform, and while voting rights can be limited or altered or changed, they generally cannot be eliminated completely. And then there's a general right to information, and this generally cannot be eliminated. If you own a business, you have access to the records and you have right to review those records. There are limitations, that is, it has to be for a good or valid purpose or an authorized purpose under the law, but generally the right to information is there. So these are the general rights of owners of a startup business, and these should be considered among the founders when they are founding a startup as to how you allocate these various rights, and if you're going to modify them away from the default rules, which is usually advisable based upon your particular situation, then you should be well familiar with these various types of rights so you can do so very precisely, usually with the help of a legal professional.